Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Sunday, August the 30th, 2020.
You talked about two justice systems. What did you mean by that?
I mean, it's obvious, sweetheart. It's obvious. The man walks down the street and kills two people and blows another man's arm off. Had that been a black man, he'd have been dead right on the spot. He'd have never been able to make it back home. He'd have never been able to make it home. He made it all the way back to Illinois, Antioch, Illinois.
That was Jacob Blake Sr., the father of Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times in the back by Kenosha police officer in Wisconsin. 7 times in the back, exactly 1 week ago today. On this episode of The Politicrat, more from that interview that Jacob Blake Sr. did with CNN's Sarah Seidner yesterday, plus more about what happened to Jacob Blake and white innocence, the notion of white innocence in America. All of that is coming up next. Welcome back. Jacob Blake was driving and he had broken up a dispute between 2 young people, both female, and he was leaving from breaking up that dispute, and his car had 3 young boys in it, all of them his sons, all 3, 8, 5, and 3 years old, in the back of his vehicle. As Jacob Blake was returning to his sons and about to get into his vehicle on the driver's side to drive on, the police had been following him, and they had been following him around his vehicle, and they had their guns drawn. That right there alone is a red flag. That is a red flag. The white police officer who was there, and I believe there was a Latino police officer as well, or white cop, white Latina, but white, 2 of them I think were there. And they followed Jacob Blake as he was about to get into his car. And the only images I have seen, because I've refused to watch this thing in full, I have absolutely refused. I am fed up of watching videos of black people being executed by police. I am fed up of watching videos of black people being executed by white people. It's as if you are tuning in to a daily broadcast, which in reality you are. Oh, and by the way, did you see the latest video? It is as if we are watching movie trailers on a daily basis, only these things that are happening are real. So there's that. But the image that I have seen most prominently of anything at all, because as I said, I've not watched the whole thing, and anybody who has watched the whole thing knows that what I'm about to say is true, is that as he gets into his vehicle, this particular white cop grabs the back of his jersey, pulls him, and then fires 7 shots from his gun at point blank range into the back of Jacob Blake, who is getting into his vehicle. Just 2 months ago, Rayshard Brooks was in Atlanta. He was a young black man who was running away from the police. He had been spending time, or was going to be spending time, with his daughter on her birthday. And a white police officer in that situation in Atlanta, Georgia, in the parking lot of a Wendy's, chased Rayshard Brooks and shot him 3 times in the back as he was running away, killing him. As he lay dying on the ground, the same white cop who killed him kicked him. And another white cop, who was the partner of the cop who killed him, stood on his shoulder. This is not only racism, and racism is severe enough as a systemic oppression of black people and a obvious tool of systemic whiteness. This is also about inhumanity. The inhumanity of racism, but the inhumanity of those white people who do this, and the inhumanity of a society and of a white society that does not speak loudly enough up against this kind of inhumanity, or any kind of inhumanity, unless it's maybe a dog or an animal of some kind. The people who do shout about it in the white community are the ones who you see on the streets. And there are many of those individuals. White people out on the streets, there have been white people who've given up their lives. So I'm not sitting here ignorant to those facts. I am not sitting here ignorant to any of it. Viola Liuzzo, James Reeb, Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, Summer Taylor, Heather Heyer, and the 2 white people who just this past Tuesday were gunned down trying to save lives, and had been marching for justice for Jacob Blake and Black Lives Matter. I'm not ignorant to that. The people you see in the streets who are white are standing up on principle and conscience. And we need to see more of it. We need to see these marches continue in white neighborhoods too, predominantly white neighborhoods. That's what we need to see. And we need to see white people challenging each other. That's something I'm going to get to a bit later. But what is not happening, and what I don't see enough of, quite frankly, is the people who are shouting about some tiger being shot by Donald Trump Jr., or some leopard or lion being shot by Donald Trump Jr. or Eric Trump. Some of those people are silent. Some of them, I believe, are silent when it comes to, or certainly less interested when it comes to a black person who is gunned down by the police or paralyzed like Jacob Blake is because some police officer thought it easier I don't have to do my work. I can be lazy. I've got my gun and my badge. I don't have to do anything because I don't see Jacob Blake as human. And that is what I think this white cop went through in his own head. But he had a knife, Wait a minute. You didn't hear a word from the police union until 4 or 5 days after this happened. They are getting a story together like they always do. And by the way, as numerous people have said, including Jacob Blake Sr., the police union doesn't factor in here. They support the defendant, who, by the way, has not been arrested yet, has not been charged with anything. Just like the cops who killed Breonna Taylor in her bed have not been charged yet. It has been nearly 6 months there in Kentucky. And you haven't heard anything about charges because there are none, about arrests because there have been none. And you've got 2 Republican senators in that state of Kentucky, one of whom is up for re-election this November, Mitch McConnell, who has violated so many laws. He should be impeached himself. And the other, Rand Paul, who is currently sitting on the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act that was passed more than 6 months ago by the House of Representatives. Mitch McConnell is sitting on laws about election security, which were passed almost 2 years ago by the Democratic House of Representatives, because that's who got the majority of the votes. They voted in the majority for both of these bills I've just mentioned. You've got one senator who's sitting on election protection and who has blocked 2 bills on the Senate floor, while the House bill just sits there and gathers dust. This is about protecting your right to go to a poll place and be secure. This is how the tyranny starts, folks. So let me just say, you have to get out there and vote. You've got 2 people in the state of Kentucky, one of whom is sitting on the Anti-Lynching Act that was passed in the House. We just had the 65th commemoration of Emmett Till being brutally assassinated and lynched. And Mitch McConnell is sitting on election protection bills. Kentucky voters, where Mitch McConnell is concerned, you've got to get rid of him from the United States Senate. He's got to go. He has got to go. There is this evil. This cop's calculus was that I don't have to do any work because I don't see Jacob Blake as a human being. So I already have my gun drawn. So I already have seen for centuries the injustice against black people perpetrated by white people. And I've seen that I don't pay a price for it. I don't have to worry because I've got the white county sheriff protecting me, the white police chief of Kenosha protecting me, and I've got a number of white people who feel very sympathetic to me. I've got Trump supporters who feel sympathetic to me. I've got someone in the White House who feels sympathetic to me. I've got a Republican legislature in Wisconsin who feel sympathetic to me. I've got a majority Republican Wisconsin Supreme Court who feels sympathetic to me. And I've got Fox News and many of their racist windbags who feel sympathetic to me. And I've got all these hate groups, these white racist groups who feel sympathetic to me. So I've got a lot of support. That's what I think the aftermath is for him. This cop. And why do I say this? Well, just listen to these comments from 2018 from the Kenosha, Wisconsin County Sheriff, David Beth.
Has to come to a threshold where there's some people that aren't worth saving. We need to build warehouses to put these people into it and lock them away for the rest of their lives. Let's put them in jail. Let's stop them from truly, at least some of these males going out and getting 10 other women pregnant and having small children. Let's put them away. At some point, we have to stop being politically correct. And I don't care what race, I don't care how old they are. If there's a threshold that they cross, these people have to be warehoused. No recreational time in the jails. We put them away. We put them away for the rest of their lives so that the rest of us can be better.
That was Wisconsin's. That was Kenosha County Sheriff David Beth in 2018 at a news conference. Now, the context there is that he was describing 5 people of color who had been accused of shoplifting and crashing a stolen car. That's the context. That is racist. What he said there is racist. And I'm going to play you this clip. Listen to this.
In this country, in this community, in this state, we have to get to the point that we no longer will put up with the garbage people that fill our communities, that are our cancer to our society.
There you go. Garbage people. Garbage people. That is the mentality, the racist mentality, that cop last week, that white cop had when he unloaded 7 shots into the back of a human being named Jacob Blake, with full knowledge that his 3 young boys were inside that vehicle. This is about racism, and it is about the inhumanity of this white cop. There is inhumanity in the people who do this. Inhumanity in those who support people who do this. Inhumanity in those people, those white people, because they're the ones who are doing this, who mock the death of, the murder of George Floyd, who do reenactments of it with smiles on their faces, as they did in one or two or several communities across this country. I have the video and the screenshots of it. These individuals are no different from the smiling-faced white mobs who stood around underneath dangling black bodies in this country, in their Sunday bests, with their kids smiling, their kids pointing, the mothers and fathers gleefully smiling away with a dangling dead body just above them, dangling from a tree. That is the inhumanity that must be confronted and spoken of and dealt with and excised. And that inhumanity and that evil has to be carved out of the hearts of the white people in this country who feel this way, who act this way, who say nothing, who do nothing, who don't speak up, who don't say anything when Jacob Blake, who is now paralyzed for the rest of his life from his waist down in a hospital bed and is shackled. That's inhumanity. The county sheriff and the Kenosha Police Department have had a long history, like every police department in this country has a long history of racism and violence and oppression of black and brown people. Centuries old. Oppression of native people. And there's this long history of inhumanity that is visited on black, brown, and native people in this country. And it's done through police forces, and it's done through white mobs. Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. This young brother is 29 years old. And I don't care if he was 99 years old. I don't care if he had a knife in his hand, which he did not. You do not shoot somebody 7 times in their back and do it on top of that at point blank range. People have to examine the inhumanity of people who are shooting someone with their back to them. Not only is that cowardly, not only is that wicked, that is evil. And the fact that this cop pulled at this guy's jersey, pulled his jersey, pulled his t-shirt rather. That's what he did. He pulls the man's t-shirt, pulls Jacob's t-shirt. Jacob's trying to get in the vehicle. There is no way that there's any, I was in fear of my life. It's garbage. He wanted to prevent Jacob from leaving. He was restraining him. He wanted to prevent him from leaving his vehicle, and entering the vehicle. He wanted to prevent him from entering his vehicle. And he thought the best way to do this was to grab his t-shirt. He had done nothing, Jacob Blake. He had done nothing to these cops. These cops now are making up stories through their racist police union. And this cop thought that the best way to prevent Jacob Blake from leaving was not making a phone call for backup, was not doing anything like that, was not setting up roadblocks or perimeters, but was by grabbing this man's t-shirt and then firing into his back 7 times. Point blank. That is not a cop in fear of his life. That is a cop who wants to murder a black man. That is the evil and the inhumanity of that cop, that white cop. That is evil and it is inhumane. And I think that, yes, racism is an obvious factor. We have whiteness and systemic whiteness in this country, and it is oppressing and killing black and brown and native people. And it's poisoning the hearts of white people as well. And some of them are paying with their lives too, as I alluded to earlier, with what happened in Kenosha during the week, last week. This is a system. This is an ideology. And it's one that cannot continue and it cannot sustain itself. And we are seeing that now there are still white people who are still not awake yet, but there are some who are. And they are making their voices heard. But we need many, many, many millions of more people who are white to come to the table and to the party here. Although it's not a party where everybody sings and dances, this is a party where we march on and demand justice, and we end this system that is absolutely state-sanctioned and violent. And it has been for 500-600 years. This has started for the Native Americans, where they were genocided. And it continues where black men and women and boys and girls are being genocided. And to call this police brutality is just another euphemism. This is evil and inhumane, and we've got to start looking at it like that. This is inhumane. And this cop is inhumane. And he should be arrested. Right now, under the jail. No, Sheriff David Beth. Let's put the cops in jail for when they do what your cop did a week ago today. And we should get rid of you out of that position that you're in. And that should be demanded from everybody in this country.
It was to keep us out of the hospital. But when they let me in and my son was paralyzed from the waist down and shackled, what could it be? He was going to get up and run away? Or maybe he was going to karate kick somebody? Or maybe they were scared of what? Why was my son shackled? Why was my son shot and then shackled? You shot him and you put him in the bed and then you shackled him? My son is a human being. He's a living, breathing, food-eating, substance-eating human. Not only is he a human, he's a human that takes care of his kids.
What do you say to all these people? You know, there are people coming out from everywhere and they all have something to say about this, and they talk about some of the charges against Mr. Blake. What do you think about that? Does that have anything to do?
None of the policemen standing out there had any idea what charges my son had in his past, what kind of person he was. All they knew is there were 3 babies in that car. 3 babies. 8, 6, and 3. Or 8, 5, and 3. What point were they trying to prove? What type of fear were they dealing? Well, they dealt a lot of fear to them babies.
That was Jacob Blake Sr. in part of an interview that he did yesterday with CNN reporter Sarah Seidner. Jacob Blake Sr. is the father of Jacob Blake, who a week ago today was brutally shot at. I mean, this guy was absolutely ambushed with gun shots. This was an attempted assassination. This was an assassination attempt. Let's just get that right. Part of the issue that I have is the language. And one of the things that I have always believed is that when we talk about things, we have to really speak about them in a language that everybody can understand. But not only a language that everyone can understand, we need to speak about things in the proper language and in the absolute context. So when people say police brutality, that is really the very least of this. It's state-sanctioned violence. Because although everybody knows what police brutality means, or at least have a sense of what that is, they can put their finger on it, there is a deeper and larger context around that. It is not in isolation. And when you say police brutality, there may be a tendency by some, or maybe not, to think that this is, it's just a one-off thing. Police brutality is a one-off thing. It certainly isn't a one-off thing. And I think everybody listening to me, at least, is very clear on that. But I think operationally, when you say police brutality, there may be people who think, well, it's just this one event that happened. And it is never a one event that happened, because usually, in almost every situation, these events are happening as part of a long history of that particular police department's situations with killing, executing black people, black women and black men and black girls and black boys. And that is part of the state. These police departments are not just there in isolation. They are part of the state. Kenosha is part of Wisconsin. These are state apparatus, municipal apparatus, the state, under color of law, the state. These are government entities and municipalities. These aren't ordinary white civilians. These are uniformed officers, and their first duty is to be in the position of supposedly protecting people and serving the communities that they are policing. But what is happening all over this country, and what has happened for hundreds of years, is that police are executing the communities that they are policing. In fact, they're not policing anything at all. They are absolutely executing. And they have become, for well over 100 years now, they have been lazy when it comes to black people, when it comes to brown people. There is an expediency measure that these police departments, I believe, have. There was a pastor, and again, there are some white people who've also been shot. There was one in Kenosha, in fact, back in the early 2000s, that is just simply, it's extremely graphic. And it was an execution point blank. It was just evil. There is evil afoot in these police departments. There is inhumanity afoot. And these events have been allowed to go on for 100 plus years. Since the 1800s, since the mid to late 1800s, which is when police in the United States really became operational, and they came out of the enslavement patrols. That's where the police really started in this country. Capturing black people who had the temerity to escape their enslavement and their bondage, and then either arresting them or just downright ending their lives, murdering them. Or returning them to their enslavement master, that white person who would basically end their lives right there and then. Or severely punish them with some physical harm. Whipping them, branding them. This is evil. This is inhumane. And when you have state-sanctioned violence, where people who are supposed to be protecting and policing you, rather than executing and monitoring every move you make with the expectation in their minds, like Sheriff David Beth, the county sheriff of Kenosha, that you're a garbage person. That is the mentality that these police have. And as a pastor said yesterday, the pastor for the mother of Jacob Blake, and I forget her last name. Her first name is Julia, the mother, and I've forgotten her last name, and I apologize. But the pastor for her, and I forget his name, was on CNN yesterday, and he said that this is about the heart, that we can call for justice and for changes and for dismantling things as much as we want. But it is the hearts of these people that you have to get to, and you cannot change their hearts. I mean, I'm saying that, although I think you can change hearts if those hearts want to change. That's the key. Do those hearts want to change? But the pastor was saying that you've got to, it's their hearts that are the issue. And I think he's right. I think that's a great part of the problem. That's part of it. But the other big part of the problem is that this is a systemic state-sanctioned violence that's gone on for so many hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. Just over, like I said, 150 plus years and counting. Or more. And that's the issue, because if you were able to completely end that state-sanctioned violence and put a system in and dismantle the system that produces it and upholds it and put in its place a completely new system that values the humanity of every single person, no matter who they are, what they look like, who they worship, who they love. If you had a system like that in place that recognized the humanity of black people, no matter what was in the hearts of these people who are doing this, their hearts would be forced to change or be forced to be regulated. Why? Because a system that recognized the humanity and respected the humanity of black people would therefore back that up by instituting the penalties and the sentencing that the killing of any white person would get by any ordinary white person, or by the killing that any black person might do to any white person or to any black person. That means a police officer like the cop in Minneapolis who executed George Floyd over a 9-minute period of torture and death, a slow torture and death, he would get the book thrown at him and he would never see the light of day again. A white person who killed a black person would get the same throw the book at them penalty. This cop in Kenosha, Wisconsin would get a severe sentence. And I don't even call it severe so much because look at what he did to Jacob Blake. What's more severe than that? Any sentence that saw him put in jail for the rest of his life for doing that would not even be a severe sentence. You see how we talk? When I talked earlier about language and how we speak about things, the notion that putting that cop in prison for 40 years would be severe as a sentence is absolutely ludicrous to me. And the fact that Jacob Blake Jr., Jacob Blake, is still alive, and by the way, fighting for his life, does not ever say, in my view, that that cop who did that cowardly attempted assassination should get any less time simply because Jacob Blake is still with us. We really have to talk in language that people can understand. And all of the flowery terms that are used do more harm than good. And then ask yourself, whenever the media does this, whenever the media talks about, vigilantes, whenever the media talks about that, what are they saying? Particularly when you're talking about a white youngster. And I'm going to call him 17 years old. The fact that I call him 17 years old does not mean that I sympathize with him. I don't. That 17-year-old kid is a racist and a terrorist and a murderer. And the deeper thing here is, yes, obviously, he subscribes to racism. He supports Donald Trump. There are videos and photos of him in the front row of a Trump rally in January 2020 in Iowa. The deeper issue with this 17-year-old white kid is that A, he's 17 years old. B, he has killed 2 people, both of them white, as I said earlier. Killed 2 people. Had shot and blown the arm off of another person, also white. And had an AR-15 that he used to do it. What is a 17-year-old doing with an AR-15? And that certainly goes to the gun laws in this country. Where did he get that from? He probably got it from Indiana, because Indiana is come on down, buy whatever gun you want. Buy a bloomin' howitzer. Buy a howitzer. Buy a cannon, freaking cannonball. Buy a cannon. Buy an RPG. I mean, Indiana. Mike Pence country. Is anything goes. Anything goes. And it would not shock me if his mother, who drove him 20 miles or so from Antioch, Illinois, into Kenosha, Wisconsin, at night. At night. What mother drives their child armed with an AR-15 20 miles at night to protect property when he's got an AR-15 strapped to him? And he's 17 years old. You see, that's the bigger thing here that I'm talking about. You see, again, when we talk about these things, we talk about them in a language that is benign and it's so regular and predictable. The same predictable type of framework is always used in these discussions, particularly in the cable news media, the national cable news media, 24-hour news cable news. No one is examining that. Because on the one hand, you've got Sheriff David Beth, the county sheriff of Kenosha, talking about let's put him in jail and, let's stop them from having these small children. At some point, we have to stop being politically correct, and I don't care what race. You do care what race. Because you're not talking about this white woman who drove her white son, a murderer, 20 miles. I think you should, Sheriff Beth, David Beth, Sheriff David, a name you've got your first name is David. For those of you who study the Bible, and I'm not a Bible studier, but I do know some of the chapters and verses. And you talk about David and Goliath, and he's got a first name, David. Here's the thing, folks. The examination should not just start with this 17-year-old boy. And it shouldn't end with Fox News and people like that piece of you-know-what, that piece of dung on the airwaves defending the inhumanity of a 17-year-old terrorist murderer. Who defends a terrorist murderer? I don't care what age he is. And enough of these television networks saying these benign things about this 17-year-old. That he's 17 is not the issue, although it is in the sense that this is how hate in this country and racism is taught from early on, much earlier than 17. And violence. This guy had guns and he had been a wannabe cop since he was 10 blooming years old. That's about his parents. That's about his mother. That's about his father. This starts in the home. And a mother who would drive her child, 17 years old. Damn it. You see, this is what I am talking about. We need to have a contextual conversation here. A mother who would drive her son 20 miles from one state into another state, strapped with an AR-15 at night to protect property. And there's photos of this woman, the mother, strapped with an AR-15 of her own or an assault rifle of her own, dressed in fatigues. These are some truly evil, sick human beings. Dressed for battle. I'm not against people having guns in this country. There've got to be responsible gun owners. And there's got to be responsible gun laws. I'm not for people not having guns. You've got states all over this country that have a long history of hunting. And most of the candidates who run in those states, like Joe Manchin, the conservative Democratic senator in West Virginia, these guys, they all go hunting. Hunting has been hunting human beings has been a staple of America. And hunting has been a staple of America, period. Shooting geese, shooting whatever, birds. And I'm not condoning any of that, but I am just saying that hunting has gone on in this country of human beings or of animals, foxes or whatever, forever. It's gone on for years. I'm for responsible gun laws. I'm for that. I'm for people having guns, but they've got to use them responsibly. They've got to be able to not have assault rifles. You're carrying around an assault rifle? What are you doing with an AR-15? This guy is polishing up his gun. And I mean, you see, this is the mentality that I'm getting at. The violent mentality in this country. Michael Moore talked about this in Bowling for Columbine, the 2002 documentary that he did. And if you have not yet seen Bowling for Columbine, I urge you to do so. Happened to win an Oscar the following year. But you shouldn't see it because it won an Oscar. That's not the reason why I'm telling you or asking you to watch it. You should see it because it tries to dig at this issue that I'm talking about. This mentality and this mindset about guns. And you've got this guy, it's been taken down now, but the media loves to show it repeatedly, just like they show him shooting these two people repeatedly. I mean, they repeatedly show that on a loop on CNN. And I would love for CNN to stop doing that. Enough is enough. This is not helpful to be showing that imagery over and over again. You're showing murder on television over and over and over again. And also with every black person that is shot and murdered on camera. You keep replaying that. You replay it. You do so much damage to black people. You do so much damage to everybody watching. It's extremely violent and disturbing and traumatic. And after a while, you're trying to desensitize people and they become just that. That's one of the reasons I'm not going to sit here and watch executions of people. Certainly not executions of black people. And I'm not going to watch executions of white people either. I refuse to watch that video too, of those two white people being shot dead. And then that other white guy having his arm blown off. No, actually, I did not watch it. I know I'm describing it like I did, but I did not. It's part of the whole issue that I am getting at here with this segment, is this violent mentality that this state-sanctioned system has, this systemic whiteness, which is about violence to protect the upper classes and an ideology of anti-blackness and the oppression of black people and native people. That's what this is about. Protecting those rich, white, male property owners. And it's ingrained deeply into this culture, into its psyche, into the media, and the police who talk more about the freaking property of somebody than they do about the human being whose life is taken. That's what I'm getting at here with this systemic oppression and this whiteness. Like I've said, like Dick Gregory said in the years ago, and like James Baldwin said years ago, whiteness is a mentality. It's an attitude. And it is systemic. It's not even about someone's skin color. But it is a prevailing attitude and a mentality that is ingrained in people. Definitely ingrained in white people, in many white people, but it's ingrained in the society overall. It accounts for why some black people are supporting this guy in the White House right now. And because Under the system of whiteness, you don't have to even be white. Carter G. Woodson talked about this in the miseducation of the Negro. Please read that book. Carter G. Woodson. WOOD. S as in Sam. ON as in Nancy. Carter G. Woodson. The Miseducation of the Negro. Please read that book. This is about a mentality. It's violent, it's dangerous, it's poisonous. Our minds are being assassinated by it. And that's the heart of this. You've got a guy on TikTok, this same 17-year-old murderer, terrorist, cleaning his guns. He's putting that on TikTok and Facebook or whatever, and he's cleaning his gun and he's firing it. This is about a violent mentality that this country has been bathed in forever. Since after murdering and genociding the Native Americans and stealing their land. Guns, guns, guns. This country's got more guns per square inch in it than anywhere else in the world. Right here in the United States. More gun deaths than anywhere else in the world in a single year. There's a mentality in this country, that's what I'm talking about, that supports a baby-faced terrorist. I don't care if he's got a baby face or he shaves every day or doesn't shave. You've got a white terrorist, white male terrorist, armed to the gill. AR-15. Again, this is what I'm talking about. We have to dig deeper when we have these conversations about these things. Nobody is talking about that mother on CNN. Damn it. You see, have you heard a single word about his mother? And if you have, you tell me, have you heard that on CNN or MSNBC or any of these? Have you heard about his mother once? And if you have, how much reporting have they done on this kid's mother? Huh? How much? Have they had a feature story on her? You haven't heard it anywhere because there is none. Certainly not on cable news. Now, there might be something locally. That's always possible. But is there? Has anybody living in Kenosha, Wisconsin, seen that report on television about this kid's mother? Where is the reporting on her? Grooming him to be this violent human being. And then his social media has racist and misogynistic, pro-police stuff. If you're pro-police, fine. But pro-police these days is not about pro-protecting communities. It's about pro-blowing away Black and brown people and Native people. It's that Dirty Harry syndrome. You've had a whole culture in this country that has been all about this. John Wayne and Stagecoach, John Wayne and The Searchers, Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry, Barney Fife. Oh my God. I mean, this stuff goes deep. TV, movies. And these cops are sanitized and painted with nice broad strokes of nice neighborhood cop. Maybe you saw that in your communities in 1950 and 60, and maybe into the 60s. But the police in this country have been literally whitewashed in whiteness, in this mentality. Every one of these films about the police before 1970 were all these whitewashed, sanitized things. Romanticizing violence when it's perpetrated by police. Because they're the good guys. They're the good boys. And then the Native Americans were being depicted as evil, as savage, when it was their land that was stolen from them by the white guy with the gun. When it was those native people in this country who were genocided. And you've got a television culture and a film culture that flips that on its head and tells and perpetuates and perpetrates this huge, grotesque lie. This is the system of whiteness. Part of that system. And it is killing black people. For all the white people listening to me at this moment, ask yourselves where you stand. And when you go to the voting booth, or when you drop off your mail-in ballot to your local precinct or your local municipal clerk's office, make sure it's early, first of all. But make sure you vote for where you stand. Either you stand on the side of this poisonous, toxic whiteness and this oppression of black people. Either you stand with that and all these shootings and all these mass shootings that are being done in this country. Most of them, the vast majority of them being done by white males. Or you stand on a side where people are demanding a complete end to all of this violence and all of this systemic whiteness and this racism and this hatred and this misogyny. An end to all of it, the domestic violence. If you want to stand on the side of that second group that I just talked about, then you vote that way. And make sure you do it right now. Early.
When Sydney jumps off the train, the white liberal people downtown were much relieved and joyful. But when black people saw him jump off the train, they yelled, "Get back on the train, you fool." The black man jumps off the train in order to reassure white people, to make them know that they are not hated, that though they have made human errors, they done nothing for which to be hated.
That was a clip from the Raoul Peck documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, which is available on Netflix. It's a must-watch. Welcome back. That was another part of the interview done yesterday of Jacob Blake Sr. He is the father of Jacob Blake, who is currently fighting for his life in hospital. CNN's Sarah Seidner interviewed Jacob Blake Sr. We must have justice for Jacob Blake. And we must have justice for Breonna Taylor. And for everyone else, George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others. And we need to vote early. We are now 65 days away from this election, with early voting beginning, I believe, either this week or next. I think it's next week in some states, and the week after in places like Minnesota. I think North Carolina is, correct me if I'm wrong, next week. And I think that's the case with the voting early. And there are going to be other states that are offering and that are having early voting. many of them, at least 29, maybe 22 or 29 states, are going to have early voting before this first debate begins. And I, by the way, think that Joe Biden needs to be out there a bit more. And he has been, but he needs to be out there more. This week, Donald Trump, would you believe, is going to Kenosha. That's going to happen, I believe, on Tuesday. Now, that is going to be an absolute nightmare. And what you're seeing now are people trying to stoke violence, these racists and these Trump supporters who are going and stoking violence and then turning around and saying, hey, look, you see? I think that anybody who responds to these Trump supporters and these people who Russia is definitely paying to stoke this violence, go and read that March 10th, 2020 New York Times article. Just search it online that talks about Russia and Russia trying to stir up and stoke racial unrest, racist racial violence. Please read that article. I wouldn't steer you wrong. You have to read that article. I've posted it on my Twitter handle at the popcorn REEL, and I posted it yesterday. Saturday. Now, yesterday, that's the 29th. So you can find it there. And the headline, if you don't want to bother going on my Twitter page, the headline is Russia trying to stoke U.S. racial tensions before election, officials say. Subtitle, Russian intelligence services are trying to incite violence by white supremacist groups to sow chaos in the U.S., American intelligence officials said. The article is by Julian Barnes and Adam Goldman. And again, it's dated March the 10th, 2020. It's in the New York Times. So, look, I'm. This is what I'm getting at here. Do not fall for the trick. Do not fall for the okie doke. Everybody who was at that march in Kenosha, Wisconsin yesterday, that was the march during which the family of Jacob Blake spoke loud and clear about seeking justice for him. And also, the same time, during that march, just after it, because Jacob Blake Sr. had spoken and CNN had covered it live, and then they cut away from it. And then when they came back from the commercial, and they cut away just when he was talking about be proud to be black, be proud that you're brown, stand up, and then they cut away from it. They went to commercial. Too much truth and too much pride for CNN to handle. And then they came back, to their credit, and played at least 3 or 4, and this is where these audio clips you're hearing is from that interview that CNN played shortly after that speech that Jacob Blake made, Jacob Blake Sr. And that's when he talked, and CNN had aired that interview that you are hearing in this podcast. But what I'm saying to people is don't be duped. All the people who were at that march yesterday must also vote. LeBron James has talked about voting. The NBA players who had that strike for 24 to 48 hours or so, and were able to at least at minimum get an assurance and a confirmation and agreement that there would be polling places opened up at NBA arenas around the country, which I think is very good to do. Now the question is, how is that going to be implemented? See, that's the issue, right? And LeBron James, by the way, is working on that, along with other people. He consulted President Obama about whether or not to continue playing. And I think that had he consulted, say, if he was still here, had he consulted Dr. King, I don't think you'd see any basketball right now in the NBA. In fact, had LeBron James, and of course, if Dr. King was still alive, is obviously the implication, obviously. if Dr. King were still here and LeBron James consulted him, you would not see basketball right now. People have got to remember the Montgomery bus boycotts. If LeBron James had consulted Rosa Parks, there would not be, and again, obviously Rosa Parks would have to be here for him to consult her. You know that. But had LeBron James consulted Rosa Parks instead of President Obama, I guarantee you, there would be no basketball being played right now in the NBA. People forget their history. People in this country in particular forget their history. Rosa Parks was one of the architects, and there were others, one of the architects of the Montgomery bus boycotts. They lasted for over a year. 1955 through 1956. I mean, this is over a year. Black folk would not take any transportation in Montgomery. They would not take those buses. They would walk, they would drive. They would not take a bus. And most black folk were walking. This is in 1955 and 1956, with the Klan running amok. Especially in Alabama. My goodness. The Klan were all over the country and still are, okay? This notion, it's only the South. That's where people start to run into something called denial. And denial is a big, big supporter of racism. Because if you're denying this, if you're white and you deny, that is a reinforcement of white privilege or whiteness and a reinforcement of racism. The denial is the racism. It's like someone on Twitter yesterday I spoke with, a white person, tweeted with, and we follow each other. I'm not getting at the motives of this person, but I am saying something that I thought was revealing. I want to just get to this and explain this and then move back to Rosa Parks. I had said that, I feel that a majority of white people in this country, this is what I tweeted, a majority of white people in this country, I believe, hold up people like this kid, this terrorist, this murderer, as some kind of hero. And that the cop who cowardly attempted to execute Jacob Blake, I think that a majority, I didn't say a vast majority, I said a majority. So there's another thing. I didn't say a vast majority, I said a majority. So that's 50.1% of the white population of this country. So I said in my tweet, I said a majority, I said, quote, I believe a majority of white people in this country believe or hold up these two people to be heroes. And so I had a response to that. And the person who is white responded to me and said, please don't think that. It is not true. And then I responded and said, look, I said, heck, I'll just read you my tweets. I just think that's easier to do. But pretty much everything that I have said right now is accurate in terms of my responses. And also what the person who I was tweeting with, who again, we follow each other on Twitter and we, every now and, once in a while we'll have interactions. So I'm not impugning this person's motives at all. I don't know the person and they don't know me. But I think the person's a decent person. I don't have any, I'm not suggesting anything about this person, but I do want to say this. And I said here, I think a majority of white people in America see the terrorist killer Kyle Rittenhouse and the cop who paralyzed Jacob Blake as heroes. I'm not going by Twitter, which comprises 22% of Americans. I go by the real world on these streets right here. and I did hashtag justice for Jacob Blake. That was my tweet. Then the response was, please don't think that it is not true. And then, first of all, I would say, even before I respond, well, how do we know it's not true? And then someone will say to me, well, how do we know that what you're saying is true? Then I responded and said, we'll see in November 63 million people voting for Trump last time. History gives me no reason to think otherwise. And I don't know that you do, but if you find my view troubling, the truth of this country and its history regarding white men who kill has been on display for centuries. And by the way, I've explained that, right? With these families who stand there posing for pictures with dangling black bodies, mutilated, burnt at the stake, posing for pictures with those bodies. Of the white men who have murdered and lynched them, the Emmett Tills who have been documented throughout the country's history, and the perpetuation of some kind of celebration, because there was a celebration of this killing of black men and women. Again, we are not studying our history. Look at what happened in Georgia years ago. And believe me, this is a point I'm going to get to, and I'm saying all this to get back to a point, okay? And I will get back to Rosa Parks because I've not forgotten. You know, this is the thing, right? That my view that a majority of white people in the country might hold these two white people up as heroes. That's shocking to some white people. Maybe if you're white listening to me right now, that might shock you, right? You might sit there and go, what? How could you say that? I'm getting to the point here. So the response from the person I spoke to, and I'm not going to go into the city, but the person mentions these two places and says that they have encountered so little of this white supremacist, racist hatred and violence. First of all, when I looked at, and she may be listening, this person may be listening. And this person may be listening to this particular podcast episode. I don't know. The person may be a regular listener. But this kind of conversation, I think it was a good exchange that we had, but I think it's a conversation that has to be had either by telephone or in person. And of course, with the coronavirus, it's now killed over 184,000 people and counting in this country, in the US of A. We can't really have that face-to-face conversation unless we do it on Zoom, and that's not really face-to-face. But the two places the person mentions are places replete with this racist violence and this terrorism. And what I found interesting is that the person mentions the word supremacist. I didn't even say anything about white supremacist, and I can't stand that term anyway, as you know. But that's not the point. I am just talking about white people. I didn't say anything about whether they were, Klan or Nazi or whatever. I didn't say that. And I just found that revealing. And it may not be indicative of anything the person is saying deeper, but I picked up on that immediately. And I think that, and I don't know if this person feels that way, but I think that a lot of us in this country, black, white, although black people, I'd say much, much less, but certainly white people, are socialized to believe that all this hatred is about people who are Nazis or bring out Confederate battle flags. I'm talking about the everyday Amy Cooper, the everyday Kevin out there, if you will, the casual person. And this has got nothing to do with left or right, because that also muddies the waters and assumes that, oh, well, it's only those right-wingers. Granted, there are extremists and violent people, excuse me, who are committing all these atrocities. There's no question that the so-called right wing has a long history of this in countries all around the world, including here in the United States. The FBI has chronicled this. These white racist groups are all from that spectrum. And it doesn't matter what spectrum they're from, but that's where they are. They're typically on the right, and there's been a long history of it. Right up to the present day. All these killings being done by white men who are driving 600, 900, 4 miles, 14 hours from one side of Texas to the other to kill 26 people in El Paso, Texas. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about this mentality. But it's interesting because I'm not talking about people who are, I didn't say that in my tweet. I just said anybody. But part of the person's tweet goes on to say, well, I feel that most of us are not evil. Now, again, this person's white. And she, so this tweet continues on. And what the person says is that they feel that most of us are not evil and the person's white and that there is hope. And so I responded and said, well, look, I hear you, but, I have to say it because it's important to note that in my tweet, I said nothing about evil or about hopelessness. And I went on to tweet in that same tweet, conveying a truth regarding a majority of white Americans. One that history and the present day reveal is not me saying I'm hopeless or that one is evil. And then I said, discomfort is key. One can't grow without it. Then I continued on. And by the way, this individual actually supported that tweet with a like. And the same with the following tweet I'm about to say. All of the white people in this country who call the cops on black people, on black girls who are 6 years old. I'll leave it right there. No need for me to proceed further. And then I ended that tweet with a quote from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So both of those tweets got support from the person I was engaging in this conversation with. And I think if we were in a world where we could have those face-to-face conversations, I think that we would have probably been able to really expand upon the conversation, and I could have got to hear more of what that person was saying and thinking, and they could hear what I've just said to you, which is the extra parts, right? Is that we, or many of us, many white people, I think, still look at hatred and racism as well. It's these Nazis and these KKK folk and these Trump supporters. They are the more violent wing, but it's also the police. It's also your teacher down the street. It's also your employer. It's also the person who follows you around in the store. It's also the person who laughs along with the racist joke that's told in a workplace. And it's also the person who says nothing or does not respond when that racist joke is told in the workplace, who does not confront it, who doesn't say anything, but who might, after work is over, call up his or her friend and talk about, God, there was this racist joke today at work, or complain about it to their spouse or say something, but not in the moment responding to it. It might be Amy Cooper. or any of the white people in this country who call the cops on black people for absolutely nothing. A black woman sleeping in her dorm, you call the cops on her. That's not just only about racism. That's about an inhumanity in people, where you think you've got to mind someone else's business except your own. Or whether it's here in San Francisco, where a Filipino brother, a gay Filipino brother, is standing on his own property and he's got Black Lives Matter written on it. And you got these two white people who live in the neighborhood telling him he doesn't live there. What are you doing that? Writing on your wall. It's his damn wall. He's been there 20 years. Oh, we're going to call the cops on you because you don't live here. You don't live here? He's been there nearly 20 blooming years. And you actually and this white woman called the freaking cops on this guy a couple of months ago. It's back June or July of this year. June. Whenever it was a couple of months ago. Called the blooming cops on him. And for him, he had a relationship. See, he's smart. Because I do too, but he has a relationship with the police. So he knew some of these cops and they came. It just so happened, right, that these cops in the area who he had got to know had driven up and said, hey, how you doing? And he mentions the person's name, the Filipino brother's name, the Filipino man's name, right? And the Filipino man says to him, hey, Johnny, or whatever his name, how you doing? And they absolutely he told the cop what was going on. And the cop just said, oh, I know this guy. Excuse me, I know this guy. How you doing? And they sat there and talked, and then he drove off. It's just that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking, see, and I'm not castigating the person on the tweet. I think the person was being honest. The person felt that, no, I don't believe that this is true. And maybe you feel that way too. Maybe you agree with that person. Maybe you feel the same way. That no, a majority of white people don't. But what I'm saying is this, is that there are many silent people out here. Could I be absolutely wrong? That it's not a majority and that it's maybe 40%? Or maybe 45? Or maybe 30? I could be wrong. But history tells me that I'm almost certainly not wrong. History tells me that. Because if I was wrong, I don't think we would have seen a Jacob Blake being shot 7 times. I don't think there would have been a George Floyd executed the way he was, executed at all. And video or no video, I just don't think if it was true that 51%, a majority of white people in this country did not see people like Rittenhouse and this piece of dung, both of these pieces of terrorist crap, as heroes. If that weren't the case, then why do we have John Wayne? Why do we have Gary Cooper? Why do we have Dirty Harry? This celebration of white men with guns. Why do we have Wyatt Earp? Huh? Why do we have those people doing that on TV or in real life or whatever? Say why. Why do we have that? Birth of a Nation. The movie from 1915 I'm talking about. Why do we have that? Well, if that weren't true, why are these incidents still happening for hundreds of years? Where is the larger white community? And as I alluded to, there are white people who've laid their lives on the line. I am not sitting here saying that hasn't happened. But what is a white person willing to give up to change what's going on right now? Because really, as I've said before, and as James Baldwin has said, as long as white people in this country carry around black people as this dreaded figure to be feared in their minds, which accounts for someone like a David Beth saying all this racist garbage and inflating this terror of black folk when the history of this country has been about white male violence. Tulsa in 1921. A massacre, over 600 black people murdered, killed by these white mobs, destroying their town in Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In 1923, Rosewood, Florida, same thing. Black people murdered up and down. Town burned to the ground, just like in Greenwood. It's happening all over the place. And that's gone on for hundreds of years. And it took you 400 years to realize that black people's lives mattered? It's a movement that's been going on for 400 or 500 years. And you got white store owners putting up Black Lives Matter signs in their stores out here in San Francisco. And look, the stores don't even have the signs in them anymore. You walk down some of the streets I walk down. Many of those businesses have taken those signs out of their windows. They're not hiring black people. Yeah, Black Lives Matter, but you're not hiring black lives to work in your shops. Black Lives Matter, but you're not putting black people in positions of power on your boards and your corporations. See what I'm saying? So this goes beyond, this goes deeper. And this notion of white innocence. And again, this is away from the tweet now. So this is I'm expanding upon this conversation, or this, what I'm saying. I recommend that you read this book. It's called White Innocence. The author is Gloria Wekker, last name Wekker. And the subtitle of this book is Paradoxes of Colonialism and Race. And what Gloria Wekker does in a really important book, I think, is talk about the Dutch and the Dutch culture. And this, as she calls it, this passionate denial of racial discrimination and colonial violence that coexist in Holland, in Holland, in the Netherlands, alongside this kind of aggressive racism and xenophobia. And she chronicles 400 years of Dutch colonial rule, right? And she talks about this mentality that says, she explains, how can you think this way? She talks about that mentality. Oh, please don't think that, right? I mean, yes, okay, I referenced this particular person's tweet again, but I reference it for the point that I'm making, which is that we have this very sanitized view that we don't really want to believe that we, or in this specific case, that a white person or white people could possibly hold such thoughts about black people or about other white people. And that taps into something deeper about white innocence, this notion of innocence in this country, and innocence actually being an actual weapon, a weaponizing tool. Innocence actually meaning the actual opposite. It's devastating in its quantitative effect. That white innocence is actually something much more sinister and violent. And that is a thing that's perpetrated in the movies, it's perpetrated on TV and media reports, in the way that the media have been dealing with this murderer and terrorist killer, saying that he's a troubled kid. He's misguided. This is what two white commentators on MSNBC said. I told you about this, Lawrence O'Donnell and Brian Williams. Those are the terms they used last week. And you've still got people using the term vigilante for this guy. And he's a murderer. He's a terrorist. They don't call him that. They don't say that his mother, if he's a troubled kid, Brian Williams, why don't you then do an expose on his mother and ask why he's troubled? If he's misguided, Lawrence O'Donnell, then why not examine his family background and where that violence was born from and that teaching in the home? He's on YouTube and on TikTok assembling his gun and polishing it and come on. See, this is the thing. When I talk about this notion, oh, white people, no, they don't think like this. The majority are, how do we know that? I don't even know that for a fact. I said I believe it based upon the 400 plus years of we still have this going on. Because if that were not true, we would not still have a system, a state-sanctioned system that does this to black people, that does this to brown people, to native people. This is about whiteness and white innocence. And so this book by Gloria Wecker is an absolute must read. She gets into all of this denial, and denial being a form of racism, which it is, and this white innocence being a form of that same perpetuation. And this safeguarding of innocence, this expression of innocence, safeguarding this white privilege. And unconsciously, perhaps, quizás, go, if you don't understand that reference at the end there in Spanish, listen to Nat King Cole's song, Quizás, which means perhaps. But you've got to listen to that song. But that's what I think, maybe subconsciously for this individual, that's what's happening, right? That perhaps, oh my goodness, no, we don't. A majority of us don't think that way. And I wasn't even talking about whether someone's evil or not. Now, I've talked about in this podcast these expressions, this violence and this kind of silence around it being evil. And this endorsing of this violence by sheriffs and by these folks on Fox, these racists on Fox, as evil. But in my tweets, I wasn't talking about evil. I was just stating what I think are, quite frankly, an opinion based on historical evidence that James Baldwin would agree with me on, or Dick Gregory, or Francis Cress Welsing, or many, they would agree with me. But even if they didn't agree with me, just look at history on your own. Look at history on your own. Look at what happened at the Moores Ford Bridge in 1946. Go and search on the internet. Moore, last name same as mine. Moores Ford Bridge, Ford Bridge. Go and search that online and read about that. I warn you that what you will be reading is very graphic indeed. This kind of violence against the black people has been going on at the hands of white people. It's been going on for centuries. And we wouldn't have a Moores Ford Bridge or a bombing in Birmingham in September of 1963. We're coming up on that commemoration again here soon, in about 2 weeks. We wouldn't have 3 civil rights workers murdered in Mississippi in 64. We wouldn't have, if more white people stood up and stopped this country from functioning and saying, we're not moving, we're going to have a blooming general strike, and we're not going to work a second until this stuff stops.
It is hard to talk to black people and not get them to see that there are 2 very different systems of justice and systems of law enforcement and the way people are treated in this country, because we keep seeing examples that illustrate to us that we are going to be treated very differently. And it is not out of the realm of possibility that this man will be treated as a hero by America for showing up and killing people. That would be a very big example of white privilege in this country. That you could do that. That you could drive home. That you could turn yourself in. In another state. It is hard to talk to black people and not get them to see that there are 2 very different systems of justice and systems of law enforcement and the way people are treated in this country, because we keep seeing examples that illustrate to us that we are going to be treated very differently. And it is not out of the realm of possibility that this man will be treated as a hero by America for showing up and killing people. That would be a very big example of white privilege in this country. That you could do that. That you could drive home. That you could turn yourself in.
I hear you.
State.
I hear you. I hear you, Charles Blow. Thank you. And just to put a
And it's always black people who are the ones who are boycotting and stopping and doing civil disobedience. And white people participate in it. But we need the white workforce to do this. And I know it's not going to happen now with coronavirus and with money being short and economics being this economy under Trump being a disaster. But let's get real, people. Let's get real. And let's look at history. And Rosa Parks in 1955 and 56, and many other black people all across the state of Alabama and across Montgomery particularly, specifically, refused to get on a bus. Refused. They walked. For over a year, they walked. And if LeBron James had asked Rosa Parks, if Rosa Parks was still here, and he had consulted her instead of President Obama, you would not have any NBA playoffs right now. And for that matter, you wouldn't have the WNBA playing. And for those sports that are not playing, thank you for continuing not to play. We cannot have business as usual. No justice, no peace. We cannot afford to keep living this way. And if you believe and you agree with me, at least on this point that I'm about to make, that we can no longer live this way and no longer sit quietly as black people are being executed in this country in your face. And it's looped on a freaking loop every single hour on national cable news in this country. If you agree with me that we can't do that and we can't sit here while these executions are continuing and we've got to put an end to all of this, then make sure you get your behind out there and vote early. And you know that the one person and the two people who are going to do something or try to do something to arrest that and end it are the two people who are on the Democratic ticket. And if they don't, you have to keep demanding that they do. And that demand doesn't even stop. It always continues, no matter who is in office. And I know that we can't afford to have this orange freak in the White House any longer. The price of that, and the price even more so of the system he came out of, that system of whiteness and oppression of black people, that price has been paid, and it is too high, and it is being paid in blood. 500 years of it. If you've never spoken out before, now is the time to speak up and speak out. And do so early at the ballot box. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.